A single punch to my face in the bridal suite silenced the wedding music ringing in my ears. While my son watched his wife wipe her knuckles, I realized they wanted more than just my blessing. They wanted my property. Alone in a cheap motel later that night, I did not cry. Instead, I searched for legal definitions of elder abuse. If they wanted a war for my assets, I would give them one they never saw coming. My name is Eleanor Whitford, and at 62 years of age, I never imagined my life would fracture inside a bridal suite in Lakeshore City. The room smelled of hairspray and expensive lilies. I was standing before the full-length mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from my modest navy blue dress, when the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me. The sound of the lock sliding into place was sharp, cutting through the muffled bass of the wedding band playing in the banquet hall down the hall. I turned to see Vanessa standing by the door. She looked breathtaking in her white lace gown, but the expression on her face was not one of a blushing bride. It was cold, calculated, and terrifyingly blank. "We need to settle this now. Eli," Vanessa said, her voice dropping the sugary pitch she used in front of the guests. She walked to the small table and slapped a folder down. "Daniel and I need the deed to the main house and the Willow Lake cabin signed over. Tonight? Consider it a practical wedding gift." I froze, my hands hovering over my pearl necklace. "Vanessa, we talked about this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the sudden knot in my stomach. "That cabin was built by my father. It holds every memory of my parents. It is where I raised Daniel. It is not just a piece of property I can hand over like a toaster." Vanessa stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Stop being such a stingy, clinging old woman. You do not need two properties. You are just being selfish." "I have to be fair," I stammered, stepping back until my hips hit the edge of the makeup vanity. "When I pass, everything will be split equally between Daniel and Grace. I cannot just give everything to you and leave my daughter with nothing." That was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Vanessa's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "Grace is a loser with a sketchbook," she screamed. "We are Daniel's real family now, not you and your pathetic, poverty-stricken past." Before I could process the insult, her arm lashed out. It happened so fast. Her fist connected solidly with my right cheekbone. The force of the blow threw me backward. I slammed into the vanity table, my elbow sweeping a tray of glass perfume bottles and foundation jars onto the tiled floor. The crash of shattering glass was deafening, a jagged counterpoint to the distant, rhythmic thumping of the music outside. Pain exploded in my face, hot and throbbing. I slumped against the wood, stunned, clutching my cheek. Through the ringing in my ears, I saw the door handle jiggle. The door cracked open a few inches. A small face appeared in the gap. It was the flower girl, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at me sprawled on the floor amidst the broken glass. A second later, a coordinator's hand grabbed the child's shoulder and yanked her back into the corridor, pulling the door shut. Moments later, the door flew open again. Daniel rushed in, his tuxedo crisp, his face flushed from the heat of the venue. He stopped dead, looking from me to his wife. "What is going on?" he demanded. I looked up at him, my hand covering the rapidly swelling bruise on my cheek. But before I could speak, Vanessa dissolved into loud, heaving sobs. She attacked me. "Daniel." Vanessa shrieked, burying her face in her hands. "She said I wasn't good enough for you. She started throwing things I I just pushed her away to protect myself. I stared at my son, waiting for him to see the truth. He looked at the broken glass. He looked at the purple welt blooming under my eye. He looked at the blood trickling from my lip. He knew. I saw the recognition in his eyes. He knew exactly what had happened. But then, he turned his back on me. He walked over to Vanessa and wrapped his arms around her trembling shoulders, whispering soothing words. Then he looked back at me over her veil, his jaw tight. "Mum, stop it," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "We will talk about this later. Go clean the blood off your mouth and put some concealer on that bruise. Do not ruin this day for me." My heart did not break. It simply stopped beating for a second. I stood up on shaky legs, walked to the sink, and wiped the blood away. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the manicured lawn for the family portraits. The photographer yelled for everyone to smile. I stood on the far edge of the frame, tilting my head so a loose curl of grey hair hid the left side of my face. I smiled, but my eyes were dead. I looked at the back of Daniel's head as he held Vanessa's waist, and the question echoed in my mind. From when did my son become a stranger that night? I sat alone on the edge of a stiff mattress in a motel room that cost $59 a night. The smell of stale cigarettes clung to the curtains. My cheek throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed into the search bar. I did not search for wedding photos. I typed 2 phrases, elder abuse and financial exploitation of seniors. The pain was still there, but as the results loaded on the small screen, something else began to rise in my chest. It was no longer just hurt. It was clarity. To understand why the bruise on my cheek felt like a betrayal of my entire existence, you have to understand where I came from. I did not grow up in the manicured suburbs of Lakeshore City. I was raised in Maple Ridge, Ohio, a town where the rust on the pickup trucks was more common than a fresh coat of paint. My mother spent 40 years carrying heavy trays at a diner until her ankles were permanently swollen. And my father drove a rig across 3 states just to keep the lights on. But he gave us one thing that felt like wealth. He built a small cabin by Willow Lake with his own 2 hands, plank by rough-hewn plank, so we would have a place to hide from the humid July heat. I never finished my degree at the community college. Instead, I took a job at the canning factory, standing on concrete floors for 8 hours a day, before finally landing a position as a payroll clerk at Bright Harbor Foods. I sat at that metal desk for over 30 years, tracking hours and cents. That was where I was when I met Martin. He was a mechanic who smelled of motor oil and peppermint gum. We did not have a grand wedding. We had a backyard barbecue. But we had warmth. When Daniel and Grace came along, we were not rich, but we were a family. Our best memories were not at resorts, but at that drafty cabin, fishing off the dock and baking cinnamon rolls on a finicky propane stove. Then the world fell out from under us. Martin died in a workshop accident when Daniel was 12 and Grace was 9. Overnight, I became the sole captain of a sinking ship. I took on every shift available. I worked nights. I taught myself the intricate language of finance and debt management because I was terrified of poverty swallowing my children whole. I remember the day I sold the Buick. It was the only way to pay for Daniel's dental work and his first semester of private tuition. For 6 years, I rode the number 42 bus to work, standing in the aisle, reciting my silent prayer. As long as they get their degrees, this is all worth it. The only asset I refused to liquidate was the cabin. It was the heart of the family. It was the place where I went to talk to Martin during the nights I could not sleep, whispering my fears into the dark timber. It was where I taught Daniel how to steer our little aluminum boat, and where I held Grace until she learned to kick her legs and swim. Daniel became my beacon of hope. He got into a prestigious economics program in the city. He used to look at me with wide, earnest eyes and say, "Mom, when I make it big, I am going to pay you back for every bus ticket." Grace, on the other hand, chose art. Daniel used to tease her mercilessly. "That is not a real job. Gracie, you are going to starve," he would say. I laughed along with him back then, not realizing I was watering the seeds of his arrogance. I poured my resources into Daniel. I paid his extra rent so he could live in a safer neighborhood. I bought him the newest laptop when his crashed. When Grace struggled, I simply patted her shoulder and said, "You are stronger, honey. You can figure it out." I did not see that I was penalizing her for her resilience while rewarding Daniel for his dependency. I spent years waiting up late to heat dinner for him when he visited from college. I scoured discount racks for shirts that looked expensive so he would fit in at his internships. Somewhere along the line, his gratitude faded into expectation. The sacrifices I made ceased to be gifts and became his birthright. In the silence of my memory, I am sitting in the cabin on a rainy afternoon, holding a shoebox of old papers. I pull out a thank you card Daniel wrote when he was 7, the crayon letters shaky but bold. "Thank you for the bike, Mum." I place it next to the wedding proof the photographer had sent to my phone earlier that day. In the photo, Daniel stands tall and handsome, but his body is turned completely toward Vanessa. He is not facing me. He is not even acknowledging that I am in the frame. The little boy who promised to take care of me had vanished, replaced by a stranger who watched his wife strike me and did nothing. I first met Vanessa at a dimly lit, high-end cocktail lounge in the Riverfront district. She was a freelance marketing specialist, a title that seemed to explain her sharp blazer and the way she scanned the room as if analyzing market trends. She did not call me Mrs. Whitford or even Eleanor. "So nice to finally meet you, Eli," she said, clinking her martini glass against my water glass. The nickname felt like a tag she had pinned on me without permission, stripping away my authority before we had even ordered appetizers. Throughout that first evening, the conversation felt less like a getting-to-know-you dinner and more like an audit. Vanessa leaned in, her eyes gleaming under the pendant lights. "Daniel is so lucky to have such a solid financial foundation from you," she said, smiling over the rim of her glass. "He mentioned you own your house outright, and that charming cabin by the lake, and a full pension from that food company." I shifted in my seat, offering a polite, tight-lipped smile. "I have managed to save a little," I said. It felt invasive, but I pushed the discomfort down, telling myself she was just being practical. In the months that followed, Daniel stopped coming to the cabin for our monthly fishing trips. He claimed he was buried under work projects, yet his social media told a different story. I saw photos of him and Vanessa at expensive resorts, drinking champagne and flashing platinum credit cards. When I gently suggested to him that he should be saving for a down payment on a house, Vanessa answered for him. "Money is for enjoying, Mom," she said, with a laugh that did not reach her eyes. "You cannot take it with you." Then came the ambush. Vanessa showed up at my house one Sunday afternoon with a glossy brochure for a high-rise building. She called it an investment opportunity. "Here is the idea," she said, spreading the floor plans over my kitchen table. We sell the cabin, maybe even this old house. We pool the money and buy a luxury condo downtown for the whole family to use. It would be modern, safe, and efficient. That sounds expensive, I said, wiping a crumb from the tablecloth. It is, she replied quickly. That is why we would put the deed in Daniel's and my name. It is just easier for the bank loans and interest rates. But you would live there whenever you wanted. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt very thin. I do not think so, Vanessa, I said softly but firmly. If you two need help with a deposit, I can give you $5,000. But my home and the cabin stay in my name until I'm gone. For a split second, Vanessa's face went dark. The bright, marketing-friendly smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer contempt. Then, just as quickly, the mask snapped back into place. Of course, Eli, she said sweetly, we just want what is best for you. But the campaign against my independence had begun. Daniel started making comments that felt scripted. Mom, you are getting older, he would say over dinner. Why are you rattling around in this big house? We just want to ensure you always have a place. You know, it was gaslighting wrapped in concern, designed to make me feel like my ownership was obsolete. Grace tried to warn me. She called from her studio, her voice tight with worry. Mum, please be careful with her, she said. I met her for coffee, and she spent 20 minutes making fun of my art career. She called it a hobby that loses money. She is obsessed with assets. Mum, normal people do not ask about your will on the second date. You are just being sensitive, Grace. I scolded her, desperate to keep the peace. She is just ambitious. I realized how wrong I was one evening when I was visiting their apartment. I was in the hallway, about to enter the living room, when I heard low voices. We need to figure out the inheritance laws, Daniel was saying, sounding tired. It is not that hard. Vanessa's voice cut in, followed by a light, chilling laugh. You just need her to sign a few papers while she is still totally lucid. It will be so much easier later. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorframe. I backed away silently, my heart hammering against my ribs. The tension peaked the week before the wedding. I received an email from a lawyer Vanessa had recommended. The subject line read, Asset Restructuring for Tax Optimization. It was a proposal to transfer the titles of my properties to a trust controlled by Daniel. When I told them I needed time to review it, Vanessa did not scream, but she radiated a silent, seething fury for days. The final blow to my denial came the night before the ceremony. I called Daniel to ask about the rehearsal dinner timing. Look, Mom, I am busy, he snapped, his voice sharp and unfamiliar. I'm trying to get everything ready for the wedding. Please, just do not make everything complicated. The line went dead. I sat alone in my kitchen, holding the silent phone. The refrigerator hummed in the empty house. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like his mother. I felt like an obstacle. I was no longer the woman who raised him. I was just a heavy piece of luggage he was waiting to unload. The night before the wedding, the air in the hotel corridor felt heavy, like the atmosphere before a summer storm. It was 11 o'clock at night. I had walked over to the suite where Daniel and Vanessa were staying, clutching a cream-colored envelope in my hand. Inside was a card I had written myself, filled with sentimental advice about patience and compromise, ironic, considering what I was about to hear. The door to their suite was not fully latched. A sliver of golden light spilled onto the carpet. I raised my hand to knock, but voices from inside stopped me cold. "We need to stick to the financial plan. Daniel," Vanessa said. Her voice was not loud, but it was sharp, devoid of any pre-wedding jitters. "The cabin alone is sitting on land worth at least $200,000. If we liquidate that, we clear my student loans and put a down payment on the condo within 3 months." My hand froze in mid-air. They were discussing my home like it was a line item on a spreadsheet. "She is attached to it. Van," Daniel replied. He sounded weary, but not defensive. He was not protecting me. He was just managing an inconvenience. "She is a stubborn old woman," Vanessa scoffed, the sound of ice clinking against glass following her words. "But she is easily manipulated by emotion. You saw how she melted when you mentioned grandchildren last week. She is desperate to be needed. We just have to press that button." I waited. I held my breath until my lungs burned, waiting for my son to defend me. I waited for him to say, "Don't talk about my mother like that." Instead, there was a long silence. Then Daniel spoke, his voice flat. "I do not have the energy to argue with her right now. Just let's get through the ceremony. After the wedding. You handle it. You handle it." Those 3 words were sharper than any knife. I stepped back, my legs suddenly feeling like they were made of lead. I pressed my back against the corridor wall, the wallpaper rough against my skin. My fingers went numb, and the card I had spent an hour writing slipped from my hand, landing silently on the patterned carpet. I did not pick it up. I turned and walked back to my room, leaving my blessing on the floor. Inside my small, single room, I did not cry. The shock had dried everything up. I opened my suitcase and dug past the silk scarf I planned to wear the next day, pulling out a small, black, leather-bound notebook. It was an old habit from my days as a payroll clerk at Bright Harbour Foods. When numbers did not add up, you wrote them down. You tracked the discrepancies until the truth revealed itself. I sat at the tiny desk, clicked my pen, and opened to a fresh page. I wrote the date at the top. Then, I began to log the data points I had been ignoring. May 15th. The dinner at the Italian restaurant. Vanessa asked about the deed transfer. June 2nd. Daniel stopped coming to the lake, said he was broke, but credit card statement on the counter showed a charge for a $400 watch. Tonight, 11:15. Conversation overheard. Strategy to use grandchildren as leverage for property seizure. I looked at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. The fluorescent light was unforgiving, highlighting every wrinkle and sunspot. "Are you just paranoid, Eleanor?" I whispered to the glass. "Or have you been a fool for 20 years? I tore a page from the back of the notebook and began to write a letter I knew I could not send yet. "Dear Grace," I wrote, the pen digging into the paper. "I am sorry. I have spent so much time trying to secure Daniel's future that I forgot to protect yours. I promise you, whatever happens, the cabin will not be stolen. It belongs to us." I folded the note and tucked it into the leather pocket of the journal. I forced myself to crawl into bed, pulling the stiff hotel sheets up to my chin. I had to sleep. Tomorrow, I had to wake up, put on my navy blue dress, and smile for the cameras. I had to play the role of the joyous mother of the groom, burying my knowledge under a layer of foundation and rouge. I slid the notebook under my pillow, keeping my hand on the cool leather cover. It felt solid. It felt like the only thing in the room that was not lying to me. "Martin," I whispered into the darkness, picturing my husband's face as it looked in the dim light of our old kitchen. If something happens tomorrow, if they try to take what you built, please give me the clarity to not let it slide. Do not let me be weak just because I love him. I closed my eyes, but the darkness behind my eyelids was not peaceful. It was waiting. The morning of the wedding arrived with a deceptive brightness. I drove to the venue, a renovated winery with exposed brick walls and sprawling vineyards, arriving at 8 in the morning to help the florist hang garlands of white hydrangeas. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to feel like a mother, not a guest. I saw Daniel standing near the altar arch, adjusting his cufflinks. In his black tuxedo, he looked so much like the little boy who used to grip my hand at the school gates, terrified of letting go. I took a step forward, my heart swelling with a desperate kind of love, ready to wave. But then Vanessa appeared. She slid her arm through his, whispering something that made him laugh. He turned his entire body toward her, presenting his back to me. He did not look for me in the empty rows of chairs. During the pre-ceremony luncheon, the humiliation began in earnest. Vanessa stood up, tapping a spoon against her champagne flute. "I just want to thank the groom's family," she announced, her voice trembling with false emotion, "for their incredible generosity in covering the costs of this beautiful day." Guests applauded. I lowered my head, staring at my salad. My cheeks burned. That generosity was $30,000 of my retirement savings, a check I had written with a shaking hand, believing I was investing in my son's happiness. Across the table, one of Vanessa's bridesmaids, a girl with sharp features, leaned forward. "So, how is the new house plan coming along? Did you guys close on the condo?" Vanessa took a slow sip of her drink, her eyes locking onto mine over the rim of the glass. "Oh, it is going great," she said smoothly. "We are just waiting on one signature. Right. Eli." My stomach turned to lead. An hour before the ceremony, Vanessa asked me to come to the bridal suite. "I need help with my hem," she said loud enough for the coordinator to hear. I followed her, hoping for a moment of peace, a moment to connect. Instead, I walked into a trap. The moment the lock clicked, the air left the room. The argument was brief, vicious, and ended with violence. I have replayed that split second 1,000 times. The smell of her heavy floral perfume was suffocating. Then, the flash of white lace and the impact. Her fist did not just graze me. It connected with the bone of my cheek with a sickening crunch. I stumbled back, my spine colliding hard with the edge of the oak vanity. The pain was blinding, a white-hot spike driving into my skull. I slid to the floor, gasping. Vanessa stood over me, rubbing her knuckles. She did not look sorry. She looked powerful. She leaned down, her voice a serpentine hiss close to my ear. "If you open your mouth out there," she whispered, "I will tell everyone you are drunk. I will say you are having a senile episode and attacked me. Look at you. You are a trembling old woman. Who are they going to believe, the bride or the jealous mother?" When Daniel burst in moments later, I looked up at him through my watering eye. I opened my mouth, ready to scream. She hit me, but I stopped. I saw the look in his eyes. It was not concern. It was panic. It was annoyance. His eyes were pleading. "Please, Mom, don't make this difficult for me." That silence was the real blow. The punch had bruised my face, but his hesitation broke my spirit. I let them apply thick concealer over the purple welt forming on my cheek. I let them fix my hair. I walked out to the ceremony like a ghost. When the pastor asked, "Who supports this man in his marriage?" I whispered, "I do." The applause that followed sounded like static. No one saw the injury beneath the makeup. They only saw a mother crying, assuming it was from joy. At the reception, I sat alone at a back table, nursing a single glass of Pinot Noir. The music was loud, the bass thumping against my ribs. Vanessa swept past my table, her dress swirling. She paused, leaning down as if to give me a kiss on the cheek. "Careful with that wine, Mum," she murmured, her voice dripping with venom. "You do not want to fall down. People might think you cannot control yourself." She breezed away before I could respond. That night, back in the motel room, I wrapped a handful of ice from the hallway machine in a washcloth and held it to my face. The cold bite was the only thing that felt real. I pulled the black notebook from under my pillow. My hand was steady now. I did not write about my heartbreak. I wrote a statement of fact. My daughter-in-law punched me on her wedding day, and my son stayed silent. From today, I am no longer anyone's shadow. I closed the book. The weeping mother was gone. The accountant had taken her place. For 3 days after the wedding, I did not answer my phone. I let it ring. Daniel called 7 times. Vanessa called twice. Their names flashing on the screen were merely data points I chose to ignore. I was not crying in bed. I was sitting at my dining room table, surrounded by stacks of paper, highlighter pens, and legal printouts. I read until my eyes burned about fiduciary duty, undue influence, and elder protection statutes. The legal language was dry, but to me, it tasted like armor. On Wednesday morning, I put on my best blazer and drove to the legal aid clinic sponsored by my former employer, Bright Harbor Foods. I sat across from a young attorney named Sarah, a sharp girl who reminded me of Grace. I did not sob. I opened my black notebook and laid out the timeline. I showed her the text messages where Vanessa had urged me to sell my home for the good of the family. "This is not just a family squabble, Mrs. Whitford," Sarah said, looking at the fading bruise on my cheek with a professional frown. "This is a pattern of coercion. You need to document this medically, immediately." I followed her advice with the efficiency of the payroll clerk I used to be. I went to my doctor and endured the shame of explaining why a 62-year-old woman had a contusion on her face. I requested a full cognitive evaluation to prove, on paper, that my mind was as sharp as a tack. Then, I walked into the police precinct. I filed a formal report regarding the assault at the winery. The officer looked up from his computer, his brow furrowed. "Do you want to press charges and have her arrested now?" "Ma'am," he asked. "No," I said, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. "Not yet. I want a case number. I want it filed and sealed. Consider it?" Insurance. It was a landmine I was burying in the garden, waiting for the right foot to step on it. My next stop was a financial planner recommended by the legal clinic. We spent 4 hours restructuring my entire life. I established an irrevocable living trust. The deed to my house and the cabin at Willow Lake were transferred out of my direct name and into the trust. The beneficiaries were strictly defined the future children of my daughter, Grace, and a local shelter for abused women. Then came the will. I watched the cursor blink on the screen as the planner deleted Daniel's name from the primary inheritance clause. I left him a specific bequest of $5,000, the exact amount I had once offered them for their condo deposit. We should add a no contest clause, the planner suggested, tapping his pen on the desk. If he challenges the will or the trust in court, he loses even that $5,000. Do it, I said, my voice steady, but I knew paperwork was not enough. I needed eyes and ears. I called the manager of the wedding venue. At first, he was reluctant to release any security footage, citing privacy policies. I understand, I said, keeping my tone pleasant but firm. However, I would hate for this to become a liability issue regarding your security measures. If my lawyer has to subpoena the footage later because of an injury claim, it might look like the venue was negligent. He emailed me the video file within 40 minutes. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. My phone buzzed with a message from the mother of the flower girl. Her daughter had been filming a dance for TikTok in the hallway outside the bridal suite. She had not posted it, but the microphone had captured everything. The heavy thud. The sound of glass shattering. Vanessa's venomous whisper. I thought you should have this. The text read. I downloaded the audio. I saved the video. I scanned every page of my notebook and my medical report. I transferred everything onto a single, silver USB drive. That weekend, I drove out to the cabin. I placed the USB drive inside an old, rusted tin that used to hold Danish butter cookies. I pried loose a brick in the fireplace hearth and tucked the tin into the dark hollow behind it. It did not feel like I was hiding a secret. It felt like I was loading a weapon. Sunday evening. I sat alone in my kitchen, sipping a mug of black coffee. The house was silent, but my mind was loud with calculations. I looked at the empty chair where Martin used to sit. They want to see how senile I am, I whispered to the empty room. They think I am just a confused old lady. Fine. Let me show them how an old accountant does the math. 2 weeks after the wedding, Daniel and Vanessa showed up at my doorstep. They brought a lemon pound cake from a bakery and a bouquet of tulips that were already starting to droop. They claimed they wanted to put the misunderstanding behind us and start fresh as a united family. I knew better. They were sharks circling a boat they thought was leaking. I invited them in, moving a little slower than usual. I rubbed my temples as I poured the tea. I have been thinking a lot since the wedding, I said, letting my voice sound thin and weary. This house is so big. Maybe you were right. Maybe I should simplify things while I still can. Vanessa's eyes lit up like a predator spotting movement in the grass. She exchanged a quick, triumphant look with Daniel. Oh, Eli, I think that is so wise, she said, leaning across the table, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We can handle all the heavy lifting. My friend, Mark, is an excellent estate attorney. We can go see him tomorrow. Okay, I whispered. But I get confused with all the legal terms lately. Can we record the meeting just so I can listen to it later if I forget what we decided? Of course, Vanessa said, smiling at Daniel as if to say, see, she is losing it. The next afternoon, we sat in a glass-walled office in downtown Lakeshore City. I placed my phone on the mahogany desk and pressed the red record button. Mark, the lawyer, was a slick man with a shiny watch who spoke too fast. So, the goal here is to transfer the Lakeshore property and the Willow Lake cabin into a joint tenancy with rights of survivorship for Daniel and Vanessa, Mark said, sliding a thick stack of papers toward me. Wait, I said, putting on my reading glasses with trembling hands. Does this mean, if I sign this, I do not own the house anymore? It means you are protected, Mrs. Whitford? Vanessa interjected, patting my hand condescendingly. You are just confused? Mark, explain to her how she gets to live there for free. For free? I asked, widening my eyes innocently. In my own house. It is for tax efficiency. Mom? Daniel muttered. Looking out the window, unable to meet my gaze, I asked question after question, forcing them to explain exactly how they were stripping me of my assets while I pretended to struggle with the concepts. I made them say it out loud. By the time we left, I had 45 minutes of audio where Vanessa and her lawyer coerced a senior citizen to sign away her life savings under the guise of protection. I did not sign a single page that day. I told them I needed to take the papers home to pray on it. Instead, I sent the audio file to Sarah at the legal clinic. She called me an hour later. Eleanor, this is gold, she said. They are practically admitting to undue influence on tape. If they try to sue you later, this recording will destroy that lawyer's career. But I was not done. During my sleepless nights of research, I had looked into Vanessa's freelance marketing business. I found forums discussing her aggressive sales tactics for a drop shipping scheme that looked suspiciously like a pyramid structure. I also remembered a piece of mail she had accidentally left at my house months ago, a final notice for a credit card with a balance of over $20,000. Working late into the night, I compiled a dossier. I submitted an anonymous tip to the state's Consumer Fraud Division regarding her business practices. I also sent a packet of information to the credit bureaus regarding potential identity theft, flagging the addresses she had used. It was petty, perhaps, but it was also justice. The fallout was immediate. 3 days later, Vanessa's credit cards were frozen, pending an investigation. The stress fractured their facade. I heard from a neighbor that they were seen screaming at each other in their driveway. Then came the call. What did you do? Daniel shouted into the phone. It was 10 o'clock at night. Vanessa is being investigated. Her accounts are locked. Did you report her? I do not know what you are talking about, I said calmly, taking a sip of herbal tea. If Vanessa has financial irregularities, that is between her and the authorities. You are ruining my marriage, he yelled. You are trying to destroy us. I am protecting myself. Daniel? I replied, my voice turning steel cold. I did not run up $20,000 in debt. I did not assault a 62-year-old woman. I am simply following the law. If that destroys your marriage, then maybe your marriage was built on a very weak foundation. I hung up before he could respond. The next morning, a letter arrived from the police department. My report regarding the assault at the winery had been formally filed and entered into the system. Vanessa now had a record. If she ever raised a hand against me or anyone else again, this report would be the first thing the prosecutor saw. I smiled. A sad, weary smile. This is not revenge yet, I whispered to the empty kitchen. This is just resetting the rules of the game. That night, I opened the leather notebook and wrote a new entry. I used to rush in to save him from every scrape, every fall, every bad grade. I thought that was love. Today, I realized that love is also letting them fall. I am not pushing him. But I am no longer catching him. I am simply letting the truth walk its own path, and I will not stand in its way. Desperation makes people sloppy, and Vanessa was drowning. With her credit frozen and the investigation closing in, she convinced Daniel to play their final, ugliest card. They filed a petition for emergency guardianship, claiming I was suffering from early-onset dementia and was susceptible to financial predators. They wanted control of the trust and the house. When the process server handed me the thick envelope, my hands shook. It is a terrible thing to see your own child sign a document declaring you unfit to live your own life. But as I sat at my kitchen table and read the legal arguments, the shaking stopped. A cold calm settled over me. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and actually laughed out loud. They think I know the law well enough to trick a judge, I said to the empty room. They forgot that I spent 30 years finding errors in payrolls for a living. The hearing took place 3 weeks later in a small, windowless courtroom that smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. Vanessa sat behind her lawyer, wearing a modest grey cardigan, wiping at dry eyes with a tissue. She looked the picture of a concerned daughter-in-law. Her lawyer, a loud man with a shiny suit, opened with the aggressive narrative. Your Honour, Mrs. Whitford is a 62-year-old widow living alone. She has become erratic, paranoid, and aggressive. She has been seen talking to herself. She is hoarding assets and refusing reasonable financial advice from her family. We believe she is no longer capable of managing her estate. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, watching Daniel. He was staring at the table, refusing to look at me. When it was my lawyer's turn, Sarah did not raise her voice. She simply laid down a stack of documents. Your Honour, Sarah said, here is a cognitive evaluation performed by Dr. Evans 3 days after the wedding. Mrs. Whitford scored 30 out of 30. Here are her bank statements for the last 5 years, showing 0 late payments and a credit score of 820. And here is her calendar, detailing her volunteer work and social engagements. Then came the pivot. The petitioners claim Mrs. Whitford is aggressive. Sarah continued. We would like to submit Exhibit C. This is security footage from the hallway of the wedding venue on the 24th of September. The judge leaned forward. On the monitor, the grainy black and white footage played. It showed a woman in a wedding dress backing an older woman into a room. It showed the older woman stumbling out moments later, holding her face. It showed the bride following her, gesturing wildly, her body language screaming dominance, not concern. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Mr. Whitford, Sarah asked Daniel, who was now sweating visibly. You entered the room seconds after this altercation. You saw your mother injured. Why did you not call the police? Daniel shifted in his seat, loosening his tie. I did not want to make a big scene. It was my wedding day. I thought they just had a disagreement. A disagreement that left a bruise on your mother's face for 2 weeks. Sarah pressed. I do not know, Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, suffocating shame. Finally, Sarah produced my black leather notebook. She did not read from it. She simply handed it to the judge. Mrs. Whitford has kept detailed logs of every interaction, every financial request, and every threat made by the petitioners. This is not the journal of a senile woman. This is the ledger of an accountant keeping receipts. The judge flipped through the pages for a long minute. When he looked up, his expression was severe. Petition denied, the judge ruled, slamming his gavel with a sound like a gunshot. Furthermore, based on the video evidence and the financial attempts made on Mrs. Whitford's estate, I am forwarding this file to the District Attorney's Office for review regarding potential elder abuse and attempted fraud. Vanessa stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is lying. She is a manipulative old witch who hates me." "Sit down, ma'am, or I will have you removed." The bailiff barked, stepping forward. Daniel grabbed Vanessa's arm, pulling her down, his face burning red. As the court adjourned, Daniel looked across the aisle at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of regret and bitterness. He looked like he wanted to approach me, to say, "Mom, I'm sorry," or maybe, "Mom, fix this." I looked at him. I gave a single, slow nod, not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement. Then, I turned my back on him. I picked up my purse and walked out of the double doors without looking back. That night, alone in my quiet house, I did not write about the pain in my chest. I opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote a single sentence. Today, I did not win against my son. I simply stopped letting him lose to his own weakness. The months following the hearing were like watching a slow-motion car crash from the safety of the sidewalk. I did not push the first domino, but I certainly did not reach out to stop it from falling. Vanessa lost her contract with the marketing firm after the fraud investigation went public. Daniel, once a rising star in his financial consultancy, was quietly let go. It turns out that having your name attached to a lawsuit involving elder abuse and attempted estate fraud makes you a liability to clients who trust you with their money. I stayed in my house. I tended to my garden. I waited. It was a Tuesday in November when the knock came. The rain was hammering against the roof, a relentless, cold downpour that blurred the streetlights. When I opened the door, Daniel was standing on the welcome mat. He looked nothing like the arrogant man in the tuxedo. He was thinner, his face gaunt and shadowed with stubble. His shirt was wrinkled, untucked on one side, and he was soaked to the bone. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough, "just to talk." I stepped aside. We sat in the kitchen. I made a pot of black coffee, the steam rising between us like a barrier. Daniel wrapped his hands around the mug, his knuckles white. He did not look at me. He stared into the dark liquid. "She left," he said finally. "Vanessa. She packed her bags while I was at a job interview. She took the car. She emptied the joint account." He let out a dry, bitter laugh. "She left me an email. Mum, do you know what it said? It said, 'If you had managed to get the property from your mother like a man, things would be different. I do not do broke.'" He looked up at me then, his eyes red and rimmed with desperation. "I have nothing. Mum? The legal fees, the credit card debt she racked up in my name. I am drowning. I need help. I just need a loan to clear the high-interest stuff, and then I can start over. I promise." For a heartbeat, I saw the 6-year-old boy who used to come running to me with a scraped knee, crying for me to fix it. My instinct, honed over 30 years of motherhood, was to reach for my checkbook. My heart physically ached to smooth the hair off his forehead and tell him it would be okay. But then I remembered the wedding. I remembered the bruise on my cheek. I remembered him looking at his wife's fist and then looking away. "Daniel?" I said softly. "Do you remember the first time you and Vanessa called me a burden I heard you? Do you remember seeing me on the floor of the bridal suite, bleeding? You told me to cover it up. You signed a petition telling a judge I was senile." I know, he interrupted, leaning forward. "I was stupid. I was manipulated. I am sorry. You were not just manipulated, I said, keeping my voice level. You made a choice. You chose the path of least resistance. You chose to let me be hurt because it was easier than fighting for me. So what? He snapped, the old anger flaring up for a second before being extinguished by fear. Are you going to punish me forever? I'm not punishing you, I replied. I am accepting my own blame. I taught you that every time you made a mess, I would be there with a mop. I crippled you with my help. I am the one who has to pay for that mistake. And I am paying for it with the loss of our relationship. I took a breath. But you have to pay for your own mistakes. And you cannot pay for them with my money. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a white envelope. I slid it across the table. Daniel grabbed it eagerly. He tore it open, expecting a check that would solve his problems. Instead, he pulled out a folded list. It contained the contact information for 3 debt consolidation nonprofits, a schedule for local Gamblers Anonymous meetings, because I knew where some of that money had really gone, and the address of a staffing agency that hired day labourers. Clipped to the back was a personal check for $1,000. What is this? He asked, staring at the paper as if it were an insult. That is enough for 1 month of rent in a studio apartment and groceries, I said. The rest is information. If you want to start over, you start there. This is a joke, he said, his voice rising. This is charity. This is humiliating. You are sitting on a house worth $500,000 and you give me a pamphlet. It is not charity, I said. It is reality. Something you have been avoiding for a long time. Daniel stood up, knocking his chair over. You are cold, he spat. You are vindictive. You are enjoying this. No, I said, remaining seated. I am heartbroken, but I will not buy your love any more, Daniel. And I will not pay for you to continue destroying yourself. He crumpled the papers in his fist, then threw them back onto the table, though he snatched the check before turning around. He stormed to the door, flinging it open. The wind and rain swirled into the hallway. Don't expect me to come back for Christmas, he yelled over the sound of the storm. I won't, I whispered. He slammed the door. The sound echoed through the house, final and heavy. My legs wanted to run. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to chase him, to call him back, to write the big check and buy the peace I craved. But I forced my feet to stay planted on the kitchen linoleum. I gripped the edge of the table until my fingers went numb. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It hurt more than the punch. That night, I sat by the window, watching the rain wash the street clean. I opened my notebook. My hand was steady, but the ink was blurry because I was finally allowing myself to cry. Revenge is not about making them suffer, I wrote. For a mother, the ultimate revenge is finally loving yourself enough to let your child carry their own pain, instead of taking it from them. It has been 2 years since I packed my life into boxes and left Lakeshore City behind. I bought a small, weather-beaten cottage in Seabrook, Maine, where the Atlantic wind is strong enough to blow the cobwebs out of anyone's head. I sold the big house. I liquidated the furniture that held too many ghosts. But I kept the cabin at Willow Lake inside the trust. I used the remaining proceeds to establish the Martin Whitford Fund, a modest grant program designed to provide legal counsel for older women trapped in financial abuse by their own families. My life is no longer defined by what I lost. It is defined by what I reclaimed. Grace drives up with my granddaughter, Lucy, almost every other weekend. The cabin, once a symbol of my battle with Daniel, has been scrubbed clean of that darkness. Yesterday, I taught Lucy how to mix batter for blueberry muffins in the same yellow bowl I used when Daniel was a boy. I told her stories about her grandfather catching a catfish as big as his arm. But I carefully steered around the memories of the nights I spent crying here. We are building new ghosts now. Happy ones. Last month, the director of the Regional Senior Center asked me to speak at a seminar on elder exploitation. My initial reaction was to refuse. I wanted to be invisible. But then I looked in the mirror at the faint lines around my eyes and thought, if I stay silent, my story remains just a bruise on my face. If I speak, it becomes a shield for someone else. I stood on a small stage in front of 40 women and a handful of social workers. My hands were sweating, but my voice did not shake. I told them everything. I described the punch in the bridal suite. I described the trust fund ambush. I spoke about Daniel, not as a monster, but as the child I loved so much, I almost let him destroy me. Then, the moderator dimmed the lights and played a video clip. It was the security footage from the winery, faces blurred to grey smudges, used now as an educational tool for identifying physical aggression. I stood in the dark and watched my own humiliation play out on the screen. But this time, I did not feel shame. I felt a cold, detached anger. That woman on the screen was a victim. The woman standing on the stage was a survivor. After the applause died down, a woman in a heavy wool coat came up to me. She gripped my hand with icy fingers. I was going to sign my deed over to my son tomorrow, she whispered, her eyes wide. He has a gambling problem, and he swore it would help him. After hearing you, I am going to call a lawyer instead. I realized then that my revenge had grown bigger than my own kitchen. As I was leaving the venue, I stopped by the refreshment table to get a bottle of water. A volunteer with a court-mandated badge on her lanyard was restocking napkins. She looked thin, her cheekbones sharp against pale skin, her hair chopped into a severe, uneven bob. She turned, and the bottle of water in her hand slipped. It was Vanessa. She was serving community service, likely part of her plea deal for the credit card fraud and identity theft charges I had helped expose. She looked at me with terror, shrinking back against the wall as if she expected me to strike her. I stood there for a long moment. I could have insulted her. I could have laughed. But I just felt tired of her. I hope you find a way to do something decent with the days you have left, I said. My voice was quiet, devoid of malice. I walked past her and out the door, leaving her standing in the fluorescent hum of the hallway. That walk away from her felt more powerful than any lawsuit. A few weeks later, a letter arrived at the fund's post office box. It was from Daniel. It was written on cheap notebook paper. He was working as a custodian at a community college 3 towns over and attending a debt support group. I am not asking for money. The letter read, I am paying off the loans slowly. I just wanted you to know I am trying to become a person you might not be ashamed of one day. I did not reply. I simply folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. This afternoon, the autumn sun is turning the maple leaves at Willow Lake into fire. I am sitting on the porch swing. Grace is inside making tea, and Lucy is collecting acorns by the dock. I open my black leather notebook to the very last page. The ink flows smoothly. I used to think revenge was making the other person lose everything. I write. Now I understand. Revenge, for an old woman like me, is simply living the rest of my life without giving them the power to make me feel ashamed ever again. I close the book. I place my hand over my heart. For the first time in years, it is not racing. It is beating slow and steady, with enough room left for the peace I finally earned. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a difficult journey to share, but I hope it helps someone out there stand their ground. I would love to read your thoughts in the comments section below. Please tell me where you are listening from and what you would have done if you were in my shoes. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel, hit the like button, and press that hype button to help this video reach more people who need to hear it.